Okay. So I thought the two papers really spoke to each other very powerfully, and I thought I would just try to sketch out of them maybe a couple of theorems about human rights and about abstraction and about indetermination and garbage. I think you both mentioned garbage in one way or another. And see if that might make a meeting point, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So I thought, Suhail, I liked very much everything that you said, but I wasn't quite sure how you felt about it. It struck me as an extremely accurate set of descriptions, and there was a tone sometimes. It was not lulling at all. There was a tone, a little edge. So I'm going to do a version of what you did, and then you tell me. I want you to tell me how you feel about it, okay?
Sounds like something I should pay for.
So either I'm agreeing with you or I'm defending something against you. So it seems to me that in the tradition of thinking about humanism, particularly when humanism is an idea attached to a politics or an ethics of human rights, there's kind of two choices, and maybe this corresponds to what you referred to as a first humanism and a second humanism. I'm not sure. But so the classic version and the one which is still, I would say, canonical and relatively orthodox among people who tell you they believe in human rights would be what we, in the good old days of theory, used to call an essentialism. That there would be an essence of humanity which is rather well-defined and knowable and listable and chartable, and human rights consists of defending the borders of that definition against various incursions or threats. But it seems to me that if you actually look at the history and the textual history of human rights declarations, of human rights practices over the last 200 years, you can get a slightly different version of what humanity is, which I would be quick to positively associate with the notion of indetermination, which could also be called abstraction. Abstraction is maybe a bad word, or the name that people use when they want to incriminate this indeterminacy. But I think it would be worth making the case for abstraction, and I think that goes maybe in both of your papers. So if you look at the way in which, for instance, various revolutionary movements, not in France, adopted and made use of the openness, the radical openness of the claims of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was, at least in its intentional structure, rather specific, and the revolutionaries did not probably actually mean everybody. They meant a very particular set of people. They didn't mean women, they didn't mean Jews, they didn't mean black people, they didn't mean a lot of other people who we might currently recognize as people. But precisely the abstraction, the openness, the indetermination of the formulas of those declarations, which were, they had this weird structure of a determining indetermination. They specified a whole bunch of rights and a whole bunch of things that were said to belong to this category of humanity, but in a way which allowed people who were not intended as the addressee of that discourse to identify or respond to it and to say, we are human too. So the great motto of that, or the great slogan of that for me, would be the sign carried by the Memphis garbage workers in a strike in the 50s, in which they walked up and down the street bearing a sign which said, "I am a man." And the idea there is, you don't, maybe I don't currently correspond to your definition of a man, but a man, or men, to adopt your modification, is a sufficiently open category that I can claim membership in it. And that, in fact, I think is the structure of almost all human rights claims. They, from a particular experience, an experience of injustice or of exile or of being treated like garbage or being faceless or nameless, they say, me particularly, I make this claim to be more than just the particular thing that I am, to be part of this other thing whose borders, I can make this claim precisely because the borders of that bigger thing have not been established once and for all. So humanity actually doesn't make any sense as a category except as an indeterminate one. And that's why we need declarations of human rights. That's why we have them, because we are continuously specifying and respecifying and attempting to redetermine on the grounds of, the groundless grounds of this indetermination. I think that's also why we need images. Images are another form or another vocabulary, another language in which those kind of claims are made. And I think that's where the notion of the space of appearance, the Arendtian space of appearance, is very important. I would kind of, in the way you told it, I think, Georges, I heard a Rancièrean background maybe in it a little bit, or at least a relation to Rancière, in addition to the moment when you actually quoted him, in which there's a notion of a public space or some kind of open forum in which beings, unrecognized or uncounted or invisible or faceless or nameless things, attempt to assert themselves or make claims, political claims or rights claims, and when they are recognized or when they are heard, it's not simply a matter of a kind of accidental imperfection in the system being rectified. It's that the entire meaning of what it means to be a subject or what it means to be a human has had to change by virtue of the addition of the new category of creature or being now understood to be a human. So when I say I am a man, and you then agree that I should be able to vote or sit at the lunch counter or whatever, it's not just like the door was inadvertently closed and then I opened up the door and you can come into politics or public space or whatever and join me. It's the entire space in which this phenomenon occurs, which is also a visual space, has transformed. The conditions of appearance have to transform, as well as just a little addition or a minor, oh yeah, we forgot to count you and now we can count you again. It seems to me today that's one of the ways in which that happens most powerfully is visually. But it can't just be a matter of, as the saying goes, making the invisible visible. The very conditions of visibility in the first place are the reasons why some of these creatures were invisible. So the condition of visibility of, this is an insight I borrow from Ariella, some of the reason why there are excluded characters or beings or things or ruins or garbage in the first place is because of the current construction of the conditions of visibility. So that's what needs to change, not just the addition of another image, but images can change the conditions in which images appear. I think that's a lesson that I would draw, which I would be quick, and you guys can challenge me if you don't think this is correct. I would assimilate that to this structural indeterminacy of the human form. So that's my attempt to map your talks onto each other. You can tell me it's ridiculous, or you can think about it, or we can open it up to
Please.
the rest.
I'm very relaxed about what you said. I think the only thing I'd sort of, I mean, I'm in agreement. I don't want to discuss how I feel about it. I'd rather just think out what needs to be thought. I think that the one thing I'd specify, maybe two issues about the structure of rights as abstract in your terms. I mean, I agree, and I think Ariella was showing the statement by Olympe de Gouges, that
Olympe de Gouges.
de Gouges, that where she kind of uses the very structure of the French Declaration of Rights, which is about men, to kind of say that women should also be included within the declaration, or the meaning of the declaration. So there's a way in which any specific declaration gets remobilized by those people who didn't write it for themselves, and so on and so forth. I think you're right to. I mean, I agree, and it's kind of in a way the logic of indeterminacy is how to. I like your formula about the determinate indeterminacy. But I think in 1948 there's a singular mutation in that history, because the United Nations Declaration is a universal declaration. You can't say me as well, because you've already been included under the Declaration of Universality. I mean, the problem with it is in the first line they scupper it by talking about brotherhood, rather than a more general sense of commonality or something. It's clear what's meant, but brotherhood is a specific formulation like of fraternity that Derrida's analysed and so
French term,
forth.
yeah.
But that's clear to do with it being in 1948. So when Universal Declaration 2.0 appears, I'm sure that'll get changed into something more neutral. But I guess it's the neutrality that I'm interested in. So I think the 48 Declaration, in its declaring itself to be universal rather than French or American, which are the two most effective and claim-worthy models for rights in the history you've outlined, seems to me to change something. I don't quite understand what it changes, but it seems to me that the declaration that's universal must sort of mutate the capacity to be included, having been garbage, because there is no garbage to the universal, unless it's not the human, which is I think what I was pushing towards. And then this might come back to some of the claims around AL's paper,
Right.
maybe around the dead. And then I think the second issue would be around what that humanism is. I have to say I've been completely, coming out of the same theory background as yourself, I've been utterly phobic around the notion of humanism and disparaging. But the provocation of this conference was to say that actually the term may not be said, but we mean it. That's I think the move from natural law as the premise for, or the genealogical base for human rights doctrine would force you to kind of accept a rump of humanism, of a traditional humanism, natural law being a kind of humanist discourse. I'm quite interested in the way in which, again, to do with those declarations you announced, I mean, certainly the current theorizations, I think your own included, stress the kind of performative character, and in a way the artificiality and construction of them. And I'm interested in how the performative, while it's singular, historical, located, specific, these people said it, not those people, nonetheless generates a humanism. And so there's this kind of weird shuttling between the universality of humanism, which is the content of the claim, and the particularity of its declaration and performative enunciation, which is always kind of localized and historicized and so on. And I think I was trying to surpass, or kind of say, well, we don't actually need this anxiety about what natural law means to human rights doctrine, by saying, well, let's just accept that these are declared universalisms, and actually that's how we must think humanism, as a consequence of the performative. There'd be more clarifications to what you said than contentions.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. If I try to summarize what I heard, first it's about indeterminacy, indetermination, and second is about humanism. I am not very comfortable with this concept of indeterminacy. I want to explain why. Because I don't know if when you speak about indeterminacy, you understand this towards the postmodernist anomie, Benjamin Buchloh, or towards the Kantian universal. It could be both. And I am more familiar with the Freudian concept of over-determination, first. And second, I would say that in this, I am a disciple of Foucault when Foucault says to know is not to put things just together. To know is to cut. Il faut savoir trancher, he says. So at a certain moment, you have to deal with indeterminacy in a polemical way, I think. Why? Because humanity, you say it does not make sense except it is undeterminate. I would say quite differently. I would say humanity or humanism is just a battlefield. It depends what you want, what you look for in such a term. So I give examples. I am very sorry not to have heard the argument about Barthes and the exhibition Family of Man, because some years ago I developed a critique of Barthes, and especially of his critique of Station's exhibition. For Barthes, it was clear that the Family of Man exhibition was humanist because it was universal and nature, so to speak, briefly speaking. I think Barthes was not at this moment able to understand that gesture, because Family of Man is an exhibition about gestures. Pathos formel are facts of culture, facts of history, and what Abi Warburg called facts of migrations. The key word is migration, Wanderungen, migrations. So, exactly at this moment, when Barthes wrote his critique, there was a very polemical context concerning the term humanism. It was the moment Primo Levi, French people could read the translation of Primo Levi, "Se è un uomo." It's not "I am a man." It's if è un uomo. If he is a man.
Yeah.
So this is different. The same moment, there was the essential text by Robert Antelme, "L'espèce humaine." And I would quote perhaps less known, in front of me, Denis Ollier knows, of course, this text. It is the Georges Bataille's wonderful article, 1956, the title of which is "L'équivoque de la culture." It's an extraordinary text because it's a praise of humanism. Strangely, because Bataille normally, so he says that we need a humanism plus entier. It is very ironistic. I don't know if you agree with me. Un humanisme plus entier, a more complete humanism, since it includes I have not the English text in my la déchirure. You understand what I mean? Yes, and also la finitude, the impossible to make a unity. So he says humanism equals the impossible to have a complete definition of what is human.
Yeah.
By the way, it's exactly what you find in Leon Battista Alberti in Quattrocento, in the wonderful political treatise Momus, which is a praise of the beggars, for example. There is an extraordinary... Renaissance humanism is also a battlefield. You can make a battlefield between Alberti and Vasari, for example. Okay, so just this idea that that I feel uncomfortable with indeterminacy. I would prefer somebody makes a choice at a certain moment. Somebody, I mean an artist, for example.
But you don't think, the way I understand it is, that's what happens each time a right is claimed, is there's, against the background of this, I like your phrase from Bataille of the ripped apart completeness, I guess. Against the background of that, not knowing where the edge of the circle is,
Of course.
then you make a claim that specifies for a certain point or a certain moment.
Yes, but for me, it does not mean that it is undeterminate, that it is... this is, for me, very postmodern. That is, you have not to choice.
No, you
everything
have to choose.
is...
Because it's indeterminate, you have to choose.
If,
It's the definition of
okay,
responsibility.
in this case, we agree completely.
Yeah.
And in this case, we agree when coming back to Rancière,
Yeah.
The beautiful word in English, demonstration. I like this word. Demonstration. Yes.
Do we have microphones for
Can I
the
respond
audience?
to
Yes,
Georges'
while we're
Yes,
getting the
of course.
microphones?
Yeah, okay. Just very quickly. Indeterminacy for me is specifically to do with contemporary art. The one who chooses, I don't think it's a choice. It's operationalized as the demand for kind of interpretive receptivity. So I think there is a choice, but in a way, the fulfillment of indeterminacy is exactly the affirmation of one's own singularity as an interpreter. So choice to me is maybe too dramatic, but it's located only in contemporary art. I don't think indeterminacy is at stake in terms of humanism or human rights. I think that's where I did that quite specific detail around impartiality and neutrality. Secondly, for that reason, I think personally I've had enough of indeterminacy in contemporary art. I'm sick of it.
So that's how you feel.
Yeah. So this is the point of passion. What I'm quite interested in is if the discussion of indeterminacy is accurate enough to describe contemporary art as it's a kind of like the meta-genre in a way, the meta-determination of contemporary art. Then we can start looking beyond contemporary art to another formation of art, which is not about indeterminacy or the fulfillment of the viewer's singularity through interpretation. That interests me as a future.
Okay.
Can I say something? I have I think a good example for you. She's a woman in France. Her name is Christiane Voller, Vollaire. She was first infirmière, nurse, and she was also a philosopher. She belonged, I think, to Médecins Sans Frontières, and she went to many very terrible places. She came back, and at the same time, she developed a critique of the humanitarian ideology from the inside, and at the same time, she made work along with now her husband, I think, Philippe Bazin. He was first a medical doctor, and he became a photographer. So now he belongs to the to the space of contemporary art. So this is a quite interesting because first it was difficult for me to how do you jump from contemporary art to Médecins Sans Frontières? This is not easy. Historically speaking, I mean, sociologically speaking.
Yeah.
Irina.
Hello. I have a question as well about that same topic to Malik, about his connection between art and humanitarianism, because I actually see them very at odds with each other and some of the key issues or the key ways where and how they present themselves. And I think I'm going to structure it around the sentence you kept on repeating, you, whoever you are, come to us. And I don't think it's the same for both. Because in humanitarianism, there is an absolute claim to moral righteousness that I don't think exists in art at all, and that makes it kind of hard for humanitarianism to have the same flexibility. And I don't think it's at all you, whoever you are, in humanitarianism either. There's some very there is a power dynamic between who is the giver, who gives sort of through a hierarchy, who gives down to the receiver, and who the giver and who the receiver are very clearly defined in the international, arena. Also, you talked about this idea of witnessing and connected that to art, but I feel also who this witnessing is aimed at is also very inflexible in a sense, because we are trying to appeal to, MSF is trying to appeal to Western civil societies for interventions, and sometimes the way they appeal and the way they witness is also very much so aimed at being spectacular and sort of generalizing how the suffering is playing out in order to gain our attention. And I don't think that's something that art is always aimed at either. It's not supposed to be generalizing or supposed to play with the assumptions, or it's supposed to reaffirm the assumptions we already have. So even though organizations like MSF, for example, try to not align themselves with state institutions, I think sometimes they do still align themselves with institutionalized assumptions about, the hierarchies that are at play. I would just like for you to maybe
I agree with, I know you're critiquing me, but I agree with you. The you, whoever you are statement is exactly not a statement of humanitarianism. It's a statement of contemporary art. And again, I'd sort of reiterate the initial separation between indeterminacy and impartiality. They're not the same thing. What I try to do is deduce a logic for the effectivity, it's not quite the right term, for the claim logic of rights from humanitarianism, and then think about art in terms of that logic. In that, I'm not saying that humanitarianism says you, whoever you are. Clearly, it says exactly the opposite. You are these people, and you need this, or we will. I'm not that expert in human rights. So around the appeal to civil society, I'd be surprised if, again, we'd have to do an analysis, and I'm not that expert. I'd be surprised if MSF explicitly formulated its appeals to Western civil society. That would seem to me to bring it very close to rights-based humanitarianism in terms of determining a political logic to its appeal. And it's absolutely phobic around an explicit declaration of politics, because it must be a moral claim, and it's a universal moral claim. So I think effectively and operationally, it's as you describe, but the trick for them is how to do that without appearing to do it. And I think that's where their claims to be moral actors rather than political actors on the basis of attenuated claim to rights rather than direct claim to rights is successful. So I take all the points you're saying, but in a way, for me, the logic's a bit more decompressed about how they affect it.
Hello. Oh, just really quickly. So the trick is what links art and humanitarianism, or can you maybe just tell me what the logic is?
The claim was that there's a logic of human rights effectivity, that they're more enacted or implemented more universally, the less explicitly they're declared. Okay, and in a way, taking that logic to contemporary art, I mean, it was a quite sort of fast move because I only had half an hour. But taking that logic to contemporary art never declares itself to be a human rights project. And it can't, because if it did, it wouldn't be indeterminate, and it would be too specific, didactic work, all that sort of stuff. But for that very reason, through this logic, it becomes an effective practical universalism. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. I mean, it was absolutely fabulous panel. And I think initially around the question of determinacy, indeterminacy, and determination, perhaps the term is a kind of an old-fashioned self-determination, no? As in the kind of the calling into action of a certain belonging, right? So that is perhaps the way I would understand the kind of one's relation to the question of determinacy. The second is, for Suhail, distinction between the moral and the political field in humanitarianism, and whether it actually works, right? Or whether there is that withdrawal from the political into the moral. We would not be involved with these people because we like their political cause, but we would be involved on the basis of need, right? And I guess this is how I understand impartiality, right? Impartiality is about a kind of an equal distribution according to need, or distribution according to need rather than your position vis-a-vis political forces, right? But then again, to become to even claim and to be able to operate on the sphere of the moral, you need to exercise politics, right? You need to understand politics. You need to understand how you stand vis-a-vis it. You need to know how to manipulate it to escape it, right? And I think this is where it falls into, one domain falls into the other. And this is one of the places where testimony, right, operates exactly in that fold, from the ethical towards the political that would enable the ethical, etc., etc., etc. No, so we cannot really kind of so clearly make that distinction, and the images, the testimonies, the evidences are exactly sitting there in that knot somehow. What do you think about that?
I agree. I thought that was what I was trying to argue around the move. The issue being that the moral claim of politics is instantiated by the appeal to civil society, but there's a great concern to determine where civil society happens and where it doesn't happen. So I think one would look at the techniques through which that sort of extracting of morality by political mobilizations takes place. And again, it was very brief, but for me, accurate enough. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at the textures and the claims and how it's organized. But the appeal to civil society, which is also the point at which MSF, in the statement I read from 2005, the point where they say we're not doing human rights. We don't do human rights. We just do needs-based humanitarianism, not rights-based humanitarianism. That's a moral, ethical claim. Maybe I'll stick with moral. I don't really know what ethics is, but so it's a moral claim. But it's obviously very well organized in terms of what's happening in the policy field with rights-based intervention. So there's a kind of it's a political articulation of a moral claim, something like that. So I agree with you, but I think the question would be, what are the techniques and maneuvers undertaken to extract morality or a claim to morality from politics? My argument, I think we're in agreement, maybe, would be that moral claim is nonetheless still politics by another name. But it's kind of neutralized politics, and that's an interesting form of politics that doesn't declare itself as such. It declares itself to be something else. No?
Marion?
I think it's a follow-up in a different direction. What if somebody cannot make a testimony and has no language and no image, I'm thinking about the whole post-human discussion and people who are now fighting for animal rights. I mean, what does it mean if you cannot do it by yourself because you're an animal? What would it mean in your discussion, because you would need a representative to do it for you? What actually a lot of youngsters do in the moment, it's actually a huge issue for people that I work with that are 20. I mean, they're absolutely engaged in animal rights. No? So what does it mean for this kind of debate?
I want to say first that my problem begins with the conclusive words written by Walter Benjamin in his thesis on history. It's about making a history of the Namenlosen, people without name. So they have no name, perhaps they have no speech, but we must make history of these people. The best example I can give you, I just give you an example. We were speaking about him. He is Chinese filmmaker, documentarist, using a small camera, filming alone, always alone. His name is Wang Bing. And recently, and it's very interesting that his work in France now belongs to contemporary art, since his last film was produced by Chantal Crousel's gallery, which is at first glance strange. It is about, the title of the film is The Man Without a Name. It is about a Chinese man who lives alone for 2 hours. That is to say, for 1 entire year of footage. This man is filmed. There is no one word. It is just Wang Bing filming this man surviving and, of course, helping him to survive. For example, giving him cigarettes because he's so poor. He's a man living in troglodyte. It's possible to say this? Okay. So he's a completely alone man in China, which is kind of paradoxical. So no one word, no name of this man, and so much respect and so much precision in the historical life of this man that I think it's the perfect example of what I can... and another example should be the way in which Pasolini was able to stay and to frame quietly each of his extras. I think it's very... and it's not only a question of politics, it's a question of representation. I used years ago to have a closer look to the backgrounds in the Renaissance painting. I love to look at the background and not really at the figures. It's the same problem. The problem of the people without names is the same problem. You have usually somebody who has a name, even a big name, when you say stars in for movies. Stars is not only the stars in the sky. We must be careful that the stars bear the names of the gods too, and the extras are the night. The extras are the background. So there is an extremely interesting exercise in art history and aesthetics is to look at the way in which a filmmaker is able to give a face to the extras. It's my exercise today. So I can make the difference between the extras in Spielberg's Schindler's List and the way in which Lanzmann was able to ask people named Figuren in the camps to speak about their own experience. So you understand what I mean? So it's, I'm not sure I answer correctly your question, but it's a step.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question of precision about one of the points that you raised before, which is the fact that you prefer the idea of the people, or les peuples, on the idea of the people, which is le peuple. And I was wondering, and in fact, when you were talking about this idea of the disappearance of the people in plural, I was thinking about this slogan which is predominant today in some countries in the Arab world, which is the scream or the shout of the people saying, the people is demanding. Yeah, the people demanding. Not in plural. Shab yarib. This is the idea. And I was wondering, in fact, in this attempt to speak about the people, les peuples in plural, it doesn't, in fact, disappears a figure which is maybe the most close to the idea of humanity or universalism, which is le peuple humain. And in fact, I'm coming back to your point about the idea of the catastrophe of la catastrophe des peuples and pas la catastrophe du peuple. That there is a multiplicity of figures which breaks possibility of communality, while the idea of le peuple, l'image de peuple, is the one that can construct communality.
When I decided for my own vocabulary, there was already a big field of discussions. I just give you one example. Jacques Derrida decided not to employ le peuple, for example. But some weeks ago, the very last text written by Jean-Luc Nancy is to give back to le peuple a new use value. My choice was not clearly determined by the philosophical French discussions, Rancière, Nancy, etc., or Agamben, more by my Warburgian training. It's clear that when Warburg analyzes an image coming from the beautiful Palazzo di Ferrara, the best example of Renaissance paintings, he is obliged to interpret this image, to speak about Arab astronomy and astrology. It means that even the most identified image as paradigmatic of Renaissance is impure and is the result of multiple Wanderungen, migrations. This is the same for the people. Are you a people? No, of course you are a big mixture of peoples. Me too, everybody. So this is, the plural is to indicate the impurity. So of course, there is a problem with identity. There is a problem with unity. And to make, once again, a reference to Deleuze, you remember the beginning of, I don't remember, Mille Plateaux, I think. Deleuze said, we wrote this book, two people, Guattari and I, and each of us were very multiple. So this book has many, many authors. I think we can we can adapt this argument to some of these big concepts, which works better in the plural and in the singular, because I am sad to have written devant l'image, because l'image does not exist. There are images, and one by one we have to speak about. Please.
Thank you. Just to take on when if you take Pasolini, for example, I would ask you, and which you know better than me, that Pasolini didn't like pen movements, but in fact he have them only when he's doing, trying to show le peuple. If we take the La Passion selon Matthäus Passion, what are the figures, the figurants, which are? It's les peuples, it's le peuple.
Of course, les peuples. Because precisely in Pasolini, you know that Pasolini, Pier Paolo Pasolini, PPP, means primissimo piano. That is, in his own name, there is his favorite framing, the primissimo piano. Of course, les peuples. Why? Because when Ninetto, for example, walks in the street, he is ragazzo of the 20th century. But for Pasolini, at the same time, he is the surviving ancient Greek. Through what? Through anthropology. That is to say, two books, very important books for Pasolini. One is the book by, I don't remember the first name, Andrea De Giorgio, a book of the 19th century, very used by Aby Warburg, who said that all the very lumpen proletariat gestures in Naples, you can find it in the Greek vases, and they are gods who make these gestures. So Ninetto, for Pasolini, is so young, so 20th century, and so old, like the nympha in Warburg. So he is multiple times. This is what I call the politics of surviving, that survivals, which is for Pasolini extremely important. Okay, I can stop here.
Thank you both.
Good, thank you.